We're continuing. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here at the podium, but I like to start these sessions with a little bit of an excerpt from my recent book, memoir that I wrote, because it gives you some idea of who I am and the background that brings me here today. This is from the preface. It begins, "I had to keep reminding myself this moment was real. It was just before noon on the 30th day of June 2022, and I was standing in front of a plain wooden door that would soon open into the Grand West Conference Room of the Supreme Court of the United States. My family was already inside. My husband, Patrick, our daughters, Talia and Layla, and my parents, Johnny and Ellery Brown, were there among the family members and friends who had gathered to witness my historic swearing in. My heart was hammering so loudly that I wondered if the two black-robed men standing on either side of me, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. and retiring Associate Justice Stephen G. Breyer, could hear it too. Only 2 hours before, they and the other 7 justices of the Supreme Court had issued their final decision of the 2021-22 term. Justice Breyer, a pragmatic consensus builder, was now stepping down from that august body. Having been privileged to serve as one of his law clerks more than 2 decades before, I would be stepping up in his place. I drew a deep breath to steady myself as the door in front of us swung wide and a court officer stepped aside to allow our passage into the room. Suddenly blinded by bright lights, I took a moment to understand that the source was a bank of video cameras set up to record the ceremony. As my eyes adjusted and I processed into the chamber behind the 2 justices, I felt heartened by the sight of my loved ones beaming at me from rows of chairs at the right side of the room. Chief Justice Roberts began by warmly welcoming those present. Then he turned toward me, now assuming a more ceremonial air. "Are you prepared to take the oath?" he said, his tone more formal than it had been a moment before. "I am," I responded in a voice that sounded firmer than I felt. Patrick positioned himself between Chief Justice Roberts and me and held out a stack of 2 Bibles. "Please raise your right hand," the Chief Justice said, and I did so briskly, simultaneously resting my left palm on the pair of holy books. On top was our ancient Jackson family Bible, its brittle pages protected by the black leather binding that Patrick had had the foresight to get refurbished in 2013 when I had been appointed to the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. I had sworn every oath since then on this cherished family Bible, just as I would now swear the constitutional oath to be administered by Chief Justice Roberts, followed by the judicial oath to be given to me by Associate Justice Breyer. Nominated by President Joe Biden 4 months earlier, I, the daughter of African-American parents who had come of age in the segregated South during the 1950s and 1960s, would become the 116th justice and the first black woman to sit on the Supreme Court in its 233-year history. These details made the other sacred volume on which I would swear my historic oath doubly significant. Tucked beneath our family's holy book was the Harlan Bible, donated to the court in 1906 by Associate Justice John Marshall Harlan. This tome had been used for the oath-taking by every Supreme Court appointee since then. Each new justice had also signed one of the book's flyleaves after being sworn in. When the court curator brought the Bible to me in my temporary chambers later that afternoon so that I could add my own signature to the venerated roll, I thought about the justices of Harlan's era who had collectively decided in the Plessy versus Ferguson opinion that state laws mandating the separation of people by race did not violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution so long as the separate facilities were equal. Harlan had been the sole dissenter in the notorious 1896 case. And now here I was, affixing my signature to his Bible in black fountain pen ink. Only one generation after my mother and father had experienced the spirit-crushing effects of racial segregation in housing, schooling, and transportation while growing up in Florida, their daughter was standing on the threshold of history, the embodiment of our ancestors' dreams, ascending to a position that Justice Harlan and his colleagues likely never imagined possible for someone like me. But if Justice Harlan and his contemporaries could not have pictured this moment, my family and I, and indeed most of America, were fully cognizant of the significance of my nomination and confirmation to our nation's highest court. In subsequent conversations with people across the country, I learned that I had been carried on a million prayers lifted up on my behalf since my nomination. I also fielded an avalanche of invitations to speak or appear in person as excited well-wishers wanted to know my story in whatever form or fashion I might be willing to tell it. How was it, they wondered, that someone with such an unusual name and from such an unconventional background came to stand in such an unprecedented place, swearing an oath on 2 stacked Bibles that symbolized how far our nation had traveled? Mine has been an unlikely journey in many respects. And of course, my new book is about that journey. I appreciate your attention here this afternoon as we discuss it. Thank you.
The end. Justice Jackson, we can't thank you enough for sharing your story.
Thank you.
With people all across this country and all across this world. You talk about, in the preface, you were talking about ancestors. And I know just a few pages later you talk about Dred Scott. You mentioned it. You mentioned Plessy versus Ferguson again, the Voting Rights Act, and all of those things. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, I believe. You mentioned all of those things, from segregation to everything else. Why is that important to you to mention that history?
Oh, my goodness. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you all for inviting me to do this presentation here today, to be once again a part of the Supreme Court Fellows Program. I actually started writing this book within a few weeks of my confirmation in 2022, because I really felt such gratitude for having gotten through that process. Some of you may have seen the confirmation hearing process. It was very arduous, and I felt like my success was not mine alone. That there were so many people who had contributed, who had invested in me, and I wanted to pay tribute to them. And it really started when I looked at my story. How did I get to be where I was? It started well before me, with the people who had opened the doors that allowed me to walk through them to get to this point. So in the book, I talk about the history of African Americans in this country, and then I focus in on my grandparents who grew up in rural Georgia and moved to Miami, Florida in the 1930s to find opportunities where there were none back in the time when they were raised. And even though they never had formal schooling themselves, their interest in ensuring that their children got an education and that the conditions were laid for improving the lives of our family what made all the difference. So I wanted to tell that story.
And you've told it incredibly. This is a love story.
Yes.
It's a love story.
In many ways.
In many, many ways. A lot of people you talk about and things that have impacted your life and the people who have poured into you.
Yes.
And so tell us about Ellery
Brown.
and Johnny Brown.
Well, first let me say, Ellery and Johnny Brown are my parents. I read from the preface because I wanted you to get a sense of who the people are. And they were incredible people. They grew up in Miami, Florida, during a time of racial segregation. There were restrictions and limitations on their ability to live freely and to fulfill their dreams. So when I was born in September of 1970. And in my sessions, when I talk with people about my book, I emphasize that. 1970 cannot be overstated in terms of its significance to the trajectory of my life. And that's because 1970 was within a few years of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the end of Jim Crow segregation in this country. And the difference that it made between my ability to progress and proceed and to do everything that I wanted to do, and that of the people in my family before me was enormous. What it meant in practical terms, first of all, my parents went to historically black colleges and universities, as one did and does, and they decided in 1967, 1968, when they finished school, to move to Washington, D.C., because that's where a lot of, I'm finding out through this book, African Americans came. This was the place that was the source of their freedom. So they moved to Washington, D.C., and I'm born here. My parents are public school teachers at the time. And my father decided that he wanted to go back to law school. He was a history teacher at Ballou, which is a public school here. And after taking his kids to, the Capitol and the court and seeing all the things, he said, maybe I want to go to law school. So when I was 3 years old, he applied and got into the University of Miami, which is where both of my parents were from, and we moved back there. And so that's why I grew up in Miami. But the point, I think, is that my parents really saw my birth and the sort of opening of society for African Americans as their opportunity to make happen all the dreams that, had been deferred for them. And so if there were piano lessons, I was in the piano lessons. If there was swimming lessons, I was in the swimming lessons. I was, I must have been 5 or 6 when my mother put me in the Miami-Dade Youth Fair, the Miami-Dade County Youth Fair, and I was standing on the stage and saying a poem, and just every activity she wanted me to do. And it was also a time in which Miami, Florida was really very interested, as many places in the South were at that moment, in opening up to people who had previously been excluded. So I went to a wonderful public high school with a lot of different people. We played together, we worked together. It was a terrific time for young people in this country.
Thank you. And 1970 is special to me as well. We were talking about that earlier. It was in 1970 that the public schools in Mississippi were forced to integrate, 16 years after Brown. My class was the first class in Yazoo City. I knew I was going to get it out. To start first grade together in an integrated environment, just like in all 82 counties across the state, because of a decision from our Supreme Court, Alexander versus Holmes, told Mississippi, integrate now. So it's so refreshing to hear you talk about that history. Talk about Ellery Brown. Talk about Johnny Brown. Talk about your grandmothers.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Mama Queenie. And
Mama Queenie, my grandmother.
And I'm going to throw this in, too.
Yes.
Jackson State University is an HBCU.
Yes.
So speech and debate is
Yes.
something that you did growing up. You said your mother put you in everything. And I think your inaugural poem at that exposition was For My People.
For My People, Margaret Walker. For my people everywhere, singing their slave songs repeatedly, their dirges and their ditties and their blues and jubilees. I memorized this whole poem as a little girl.
Right.
And, years later, I asked my mom why that poem. Margaret Walker was a poetess, a writer in the 40s, 50s, and my mother had learned about that poem when she went to college and just loved the message and wanted her daughter to grow up with a feeling of confidence and pride in who I am. My parents gave me an African name intentionally. It means lovely one, because they were very interested in ensuring that in a society that, at least for them, had been very closed off, very not welcoming to African Americans, they wanted their daughter to grow up with pride. And so they did all of these things intentionally.
And their daughter has grown up with much pride. Margaret Walker Alexander, professor at Jackson State University. Mm-hmm. Jubilee for my people.
Yes.
It is just so refreshing to hear you talk about that side of your story, that side of the things that we went through. So I know speech and debate was very important to you.
So important. I try to get high school kids whenever I can. I talk to a lot of young people and I say, what are you doing for your extracurriculars? Have you thought about speech and debate? Because it was just so wonderful as a skill building exercise. And in my school, I went to a big public high school in Miami, Florida. And we had a very committed debate coach who was flamboyant and larger than life. She was fantastic. And she really wanted her kids to do well in competitive forensics is what the kind of category of speech and debate is called. And we would sell bagels and candy and do all of these things to raise money to travel. And we got to travel around on buses in our state, and then every once in a while we would go on a national tournament, fly somewhere, and I credit her with so much of what happens to me later in life because, she taught me to reason, she taught me to write, she taught me to believe in myself. She could see something in me and my ability to do public speaking that I think she really wanted to nurture. She poured into me in a lot of ways, and she took me to Harvard. I didn't know anything about Harvard. I had never really even heard of it in any meaningful sense, but they had a debate tournament in February for a kid from Miami. A little rough, but we went several years in a row. And when I was there, I thought, well, this seems like a nice school. So I put it on my list of schools to apply to, and I got in.
Wow. You mentioned the speech and debate.
Yes.
You did not mention that you were like a world-class person. You won many of them.
I won many tournaments. Yes, I did. Well, I was in it for a long time. Mrs. Berger came to the junior high. At that time, we had junior high and high school. Some of you might remember this. Junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and then high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th. So when I was in 8th grade, Mrs. Berger brought the Miami Palmetto senior high kids over to the junior high, and they did a little thing, and they wanted to recruit junior high kids to be a part of the program so that there's enough time to really practice and learn how to do it. You really do need a few years. And my friend Stephen and I signed up, and we used to go over to the high school early in the morning. That's how I knew I really liked it, because you had to be there at like 7:30 or something in high school. But I started as a 9th grader, And so by the time I got to be a senior, I was pretty good.
I mean, but I've been involved in a lot of things for a long time and didn't come in first place. so I appreciate the body. You mentioned that Fran Berger is your debate coach's name, and you speak eloquently about her throughout the book, and how much impact she had, and you did get into Harvard.
I did. Can I tell the story about my grandmother?
Please tell the story.
So my grandmother, my mother's mother, was really the kind of matriarch of our family. Very religious, but not educated beyond just grade school. And she and my grandfather really worked hard in a lot of day laboring types of jobs to put their kids through college. And but her worldview was HBCUs. So when I got into Harvard, I had told her that I was thinking about going to school in Washington, D.C., and then I wanted to go to Georgetown or, wanted to go to school in D.C. I get into Harvard, and I go, Grandma, guess what? I got into Harvard. And she said, oh, Howard, baby, that's so wonderful. And I said, no, Grandma, I know I said I wanted to go to Washington, D.C., but this school is in Massachusetts, and it's a really good school. And she said, oh, well, I guess that Harvard is a perfectly good school, too. And she never quite got it into her mind that I went to Harvard rather than Howard.
Yeah, so. Well, Howard is an excellent place.
Excellent.
But let's talk about your time at Harvard.
Yes.
And what was some of the things that you got involved in there, and the things that have helped shape who you are now.
Well, it's like the story of my life. It's a lot of the people that you meet that really make the difference in terms of helping you in your life in so many different ways. When I first got to Harvard, it was really hard. Not hard academically, but hard to adjust to a totally different environment. I was a big public school kid from warm Florida, not used to New England. The weather, the way of being. I was meeting people like my eventual husband who had gone to, prep school in New England, and it was just a completely different animal. And I remember my birthday's in September, and I turned 18 within a couple weeks of starting college that my freshman year, and I was so depressed because here I was in this new environment, really far from home. Birthdays had been a big thing in my extended family, so this was the first time I'm away from my family on my birthday, and I just was having a hard time at the beginning. And I tell the story in the book that I have also told publicly about around this time, walking through the yard, Harvard yard, in a really kind of depressed state, and I'm on the path, and I cross a black woman who I don't know, and she leans over and says, "Persevere," and keeps going. And I was like, and I, didn't think a whole lot about it until later when I got a letter. My aunt was a missionary, traveling all around Haiti, all sorts of places. She wrote me a letter, and for my birthday, and she said something to the effect of, please remember that God has angels all around you to protect you. So I thought to myself, I wonder if that lady was an angel.
She was.
She was.
Yeah,
and it helped to sort of shore me up. Right after that, I started feeling like I was better able to understand what was happening in some of my early classes. I did well, and I kind of got my footing, and then I met my roommates, who turned out to be my lifelong sisters. I have one brother, no sisters, but I met these women, and we bonded, And that really helped. And then I met my now husband, then boyfriend. So this is a love story that I talk about in the book, but.
Oh, we're going to talk about it here, too. Because, boy, it is great reading. But you mentioned your sisters.
Yes.
Because you did grow up with just Ketanji. And really, you were much older than he was.
We were almost 10 years apart.
Okay.
So when I went off to Harvard at 18, he was 9 years old.
Yeah, he was just a little mad.
Exactly. Yes.
What was that relationship, finding those sisters? Because that's incredible. That's important for your development.
No, it was just wonderful. I mean, I try to tell young people that if you can find people who get you and who support you, it makes all the difference. You know, I saw that through the confirmation process. I was very, very focused on memorizing the things I had to memorize, and meeting the senators, and doing all the stuff. And I learned almost after the fact that my sisters, these women who are now, professors at law schools and working in high-level legal positions, took time off from their work and were like doing interviews, and we're like out there stumping for my confirmation, which I didn't even know. So it was really just wonderful to have that kind of support.
You were also involved in the Black Students Association, I think.
I was.
Why?
Why? Well, I think it goes back to my saying that when you arrive in a new environment, sometimes helps to find the familiar in order to feel comfortable enough to get to where you can focus and do the work that you need to do. And so I thought having a community, feeling like I could find people who had similar background experiences and who were continuing to experience the world in a similar way was very helpful for me.
You were also involved in common casting, I believe.
I did.
Okay.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that before we get to Patrick, because we're getting to Patrick.
Oh my goodness. No, so as you said, I done well in speech and debate in high school. So I decided to do something different in college. I decided to do theater, and I did a bunch of different shows, and I was in a drama class with some famous people. I had a class once where I was there with Matt Damon, who at that time...
Whoa, y'all know him? Does somebody know that guy?
Well, it was just interesting because it was very memorable. He was already sort of doing community theater and a little well-known, and everybody knew he wanted to be an actor. He was a year ahead of me, and we're in this drama class together, and the professor pairs us together for a scene, and I think it was something really boring, like Waiting for Godot or something, where you're just sitting on the stage, and I do my little scene, and he does the scene, but he's like in almost semi-professional theater right now, so this is nothing for him. And when it's over, the professor says, "Ketanji, you were very good. Matt, we'll talk." And I remember thinking, I was better than Matt Damon in a scene.
And you still are. When we, I've been reading up on you,
Yes.
watching you and stuff,
Yes.
and I think at some point in time, a whole bunch of people already said that you were going to be on the Supreme Court before you even got there. But you said you wanted to be a justice who also performed.
I did. Well, because part of what I did in speech and debate in high school, I did original oratory was my main activity, which is writing your own speeches and delivering them, memorizing them and delivering them. But I also did some of the other speaking events to include dramatic interpretation and humorous interpretation, which are events that are like, if anybody's seen Anna Devere Smith's one-woman show where she plays all the characters, they're kind of like that. And I enjoyed it, and I was good at it, and so I thought I'm going to do theater in college. So when I applied to college, I said to the admissions committee, I really need to go to Harvard because it will help me to fulfill my dream of being the first African-American Supreme Court justice to appear on a Broadway stage.
Check. You done it, right? Check that off the list. You did that too, right? So now it's Patrick's turn. Tell me.
So I alluded a little bit ago to Patrick's background. My husband, now husband, then friend on campus, is, I think we'd call him a Boston Brahmin. He's from a family that has been in the area since before the Mayflower. He's 7th generation Harvard, and very, very different than I am. But we both take this class. He's a year ahead of me in age, and we both take a class called The Changing Concept of Race in America. It's a historical studies, a core class that you have to take. And I'm a sophomore, he's a junior. And we end up kind of sitting near each other. He's tapping me on the shoulder. He's, you know, kind of saying little things to me. And I started to think, oh, this guy's kind of cute, you know. And we were chatting it up. And then I notice, you know, this class is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I notice on Tuesday and Thursday I have a government class, and I see him in the government class, and he's not saying anything to me at all. At all. And I'm waving down the row and, you know, nothing. So I was like, this is weird. So I say to my girlfriends, my sisters, what's going on with this? And they're like, leave him alone. He's obviously crazy. Don't. They're like, cut him off. So I say, no, I'm going to confront him. I'm going to confront him on one of the friendly days. So on one of the friendly days, I say to him, why don't you talk to me in our government class? And he says, I'm not taking a government class. And I say, yes, you are. I see you in the government class. And then he goes, oh, you must be talking about my identical twin brother, William, which is true. He has an identical twin brother. And so we met in this very weird way. But that was fun.
That was fun. And I know those sisters had more to say about it than that.
Yes, they did. But no, at least he wasn't crazy. We figured that out. No, and we've been together. We've been married, well, we dated for 7 years, 7.5 years before we got married, and we've been married for 28 years. So, long time.
There's a point in the book where you talk about him talking to your parents, asking for your hand in marriage, you know, talking.
Well, one of the things is, it's so interesting because we come from these very, very different backgrounds, but the values are very similar. And so there's overlap. So his family's sort of traditional, my family's sort of traditional. He knew that if he was going to propose, he wanted to have, you know, buy-in from the families, and he actually flew down to Miami without my knowledge. You know, it was very sweet. My husband is a doctor, and he's a surgeon, and he went through the whole matching process for getting into residency post-medical school. And during that process, he applied to hospitals in Miami, to Jackson in Miami, among other hospitals. And I thought it was kind of odd because he'd never said he wanted to go to Miami, but, you know, he actually did that because he wanted the opportunity to be with my parents alone without me there. And I learned later that during that time, he was very nervous, but he goes to my parents' house and sits down with them and says, you know, I love your daughter and I want to marry her. And it was a little tense. At least at the beginning. I mean, my parents, we had dated for a long time. So my parents had gotten to know him, had met his family, liked him a great deal. But this was a big step. I mean, this was 1996. So it's not today. This was a while ago. And interracial marriages were not as common as they are right now. And again, my parents were very proud of their African-American heritage. And so my dad said something to the effect of, well, You know, if this had been, you know, when I was a young man, you probably wouldn't be in my house, not to mention asking for my daughter's hand in marriage. But, you know, I've seen how you treat her, and I know that you love her, and so you have my support.
He also made the point
Yes.
with Patrick that
Yes.
you understand you married a black woman.
Yes.
You're going to have black children.
Yes.
You're going to face discrimination.
Yes. That's right. And Patrick was willing to, you know, acknowledge that and to accept it, and what that meant for us teaching and raising our daughters to be proud of who they are.
And your mom had 2 questions.
My mom had 2 questions. My mom said very little until she got to the point of saying 2 things. One, do you love my daughter? Just confirming. And the other, do you believe in God? Those were the 2 questions. And once he affirmed both, she said, you have my blessing.
Yeah, and you talk about faith throughout the book. You talk about those prayer warriors, your grandmother. You talk about
my aunt.
Your aunt Carolyn, who again poured those prayers over you all those years.
That's right.
Let's transition from Harvard to about the time of graduation. Well, no, I guess your junior year. You decided to work at public defender sort of services, right?
I did. So, you know, everybody's looking their junior year. What am I going to write my thesis about? What am I going to, you know, do for my career? I had wanted to be a lawyer ever since my dad was a lawyer, went to law school. So that wasn't the issue. But I thought it would be nice to get a little bit of experience in a different environment. And I took a summer internship at what was then quite new, a program called the Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, which is a part of the Vera Institute of Justice in New York City. And I had never really been to New York City before, never spent any time there, lived in Harlem, and it was really just an amazing, eye-opening experience for me. It was totally different than I was used to.
In fact, this is what you said about it.
Yeah.
I have never experienced anything as devastating, instructive, or empowering as working to bring justice to a community that had so little. I understood for the first time the awesome power of the law to heal or to hurt people. How have you, and I know we're just in your junior year now, we haven't even gotten to law school and all that, but as a judge, how have you, as a person, as a judge, how have you tried to use the law as a healing force?
Well, I mean, from that experience on, which was such an eye-opening time for me, I got to really understand how the law impacts people, real people, in their daily lives. And I think I've carried that knowledge with me throughout the various positions that I've had. I was fortunate to be appointed as a district judge, and so for the longest period of time so far in my career, I had trials, I sentenced people, I did the very important work of a district judge actually interfacing with the people in the community whose lives are being affected. Then I was on the Court of Appeals, and now I'm on the Supreme Court. And I think all of those experiences matter in terms of how I look at the law and how I do my work.
And before becoming a judge, obviously you went to law school. You decided to go to Harvard.
I did.
Again.
I did.
You loved it so much, I guess. But you took a gap year.
I took a gap year to work at Time Magazine. I like New York so much. I stayed in New York.
So you're in theater, you're a journalist, a justice. Tell us about that time.
Right. Oh, no. That year in New York between college and law school was like one of the best years of my entire life. Now, I understand it is quite common for college students to take time before they go to law school. But back when I went to law school, it was not common. So you talked about the sisters that I have. All 4 of us got into Harvard Law School, and the 3 of them went straight. And I took a year off, and I had other friends who went straight, and I was like the outlier to take time off. My father was very certain that I should go to law school, that I got the opportunity to go to Time magazine because I had a writing professor who was a mentor at Harvard, and he said, you know, you don't want to go to law school. You do not want to go to law school. He's like, you're too good a writer. You should be a journalist. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you to try to find a position in journalism. And my dad was like, yeah, no. You've always wanted to be a lawyer. So the compromise was that I applied to law school while I was still in college, and I deferred to allow me to do this position at Time magazine. And it was fantastic because it was just a free year. I'd already taken the LSAT. I'd already gotten into law school. And it was like, what is better than being in Manhattan, you know, in your 20s with like, you know, a job. It was just the best. It was the best.
So you then go on to Harvard.
So I come back to law school.
Go to law school. Become a member of the Harvard Law Review, which obviously is something of significance. And, you know, you mastered law school. And then there was a time where you started thinking about, what do I do next? And I think your first job out of law school was as a law clerk.
My first job, yes.
And it was with our friend, Patty Saris.
Patty Saris, who is fantastic.
She's fantastic. One of those angels.
Yes. I really do believe that. I mean, there were so many people who I can point to who took an interest, who focused, who nurtured me in some way. Patty Saris was the most fantastic mentor around work-life balance, because here was a woman who was a district judge in Massachusetts who had 4 children. Her youngest child was in elementary school when I clerked for her, and to just watch her manage all of this made me think, okay, maybe, you know, I can have a family and do the kinds of things that she does.
And you know, because I talk to law students all the time, and sometimes they don't. Is there any value to clerking?
Oh, my goodness.
There you go.
Oh, my goodness.
See, they don't listen to me.
Oh, my goodness. No, I mean, clerking is extraordinary. If you think about what it is that you do as a litigator, if you're interested in being a litigator, is your job is going to be to try to persuade judges to rule in favor of your client. And so to have had the opportunity to work with a judge, to see how judges process information, how they think about cases, to help them work on their opinions, all of that is really valuable information for you as a lawyer. You take that with you when you go out into the field, and you are able to craft, I think, more persuasive arguments because you've seen it from the side of the judge.
And the district court was not the only place you clerked.
I clerked for Patty Saris on the district court. I clerked for Bruce Selya on the First Circuit. I ended up doing that because my husband was in residency at the Mass General, and we were trying to get our schedules to line up. We had a very busy time early in our professional careers with the different tracks and trying to make sure that we were in the same place at the same time. And he could only take time off to do research. I knew I wanted to be in Washington, D.C. And after 3 years of residency, he could take some time off to do research at a hospital in D.C. So we were trying to get our schedules to align. I graduated from law school during his first year of medical school, his first year of residency, and then I do the 2 clerkships so that we could be in the same place coming down to D.C. And Bruce Selya was a wonderful mentor. He was so fastidious in his writing. Those of you who've read his opinions know that he uses these arcane words in his opinions, but he's also just an extraordinary thinker and writer, and just being with him in terms of figuring out how to construct an opinion was amazing. So I did that,
And then you
Then we moved down to D.C., and I worked at a law firm for a year when I had the call, the call from the blue, which led to my being interviewed by Justice Breyer. for the Supreme Court clerkship.
Call from an angel.
Another angel.
Another
Angel in my life.
Right.
Yeah.
And how was that experience, clerking on the court?
It was amazing. I mean, I will tell you, just between you and me, it was probably not my most fun year of clerking. I mean, I clerked at all 3 levels, so I have a little bit of basis of comparison. It was so intense. There's a reason why the Supreme Court clerkship is only 1 year. Because, as Justice Ginsburg apparently is quoted as saying, it's like a treadmill that just gets faster and faster and faster and faster. At some point, you have to get off. And so, I mean, it was really an incredible time of mentorship and guidance and learning and amazing, overwhelming. After the year, I was ready to go. But it was great. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you had been in a law firm. After clerking, you went to a boutique sort of law back in Boston.
Back in Boston, I went to what I call the mothership.
Okay.
The big law firm. Throughout my career, I've done the big law firm. I've done the boutique law firm. I've done the satellite office of the big law firm. I've done all kinds of things. Yeah.
And by this time, you and Patrick are married and started thinking about
having a family. Yes, when I went back to after my Supreme Court clerkship, I was 4 months pregnant when I finished my Supreme Court clerkship. So part of the reason why it was so overwhelming was that near the end, those of you who know the cycle of the court, the end is like the hardest part because I was morning sickness and all of that. And I then went to Goodwin Procter, which is a big firm in Boston, because Patrick had to go back to finish the other 2 years of his residency. And it was really, really hard. It was really hard to have an infant in a law firm, big law firm dynamic, especially when my husband was in surgical residency, so he was really not available. So it was very much like single parenting with an infant.
Right. But the story talks about how you all work together so incredibly.
We tried.
To make sure. No, you did. You did.
Yeah, well, it's because he's great.
Right.
Really, really great.
How he pitched in, how you pitched in, how you all made sacrifices for each other.
We did.
During that time.
I'm very fortunate, really blessed to have found someone who is also very self-sacrificial in terms of wanting to give as much as he can to the family to make things work.
And eventually y'all came back to Maryland?
We did.
To Maryland, actually,
We came back to Maryland. We bought a house. Which was great. We landed back in Maryland. I put in the book. You have, if any of you are ever fortunate enough to write a book about your life, there will be these moments that, stand out for you. And one of the moments that stands out for me was moving to Maryland at that point with my infant daughter. Patrick had been invited to stay on another year at the Mass General, and I took the nanny and said, we're moving to D.C. And it was good for him, too, because I didn't want to put the pressure on him. If we're still there, he's got to run home. I wanted him to focus on finishing up his program. But we move the weekend after they catch the sniper. Do you remember the D.C. sniper? And for the 2 or 3 weeks, right up until our move, we were like, are we really going? Are we going to take our baby and go down? And then they catch these sniper guys, and then it's like the moving trucks are there and we're going down. My mother was like, I don't know that this is a good idea. But I will never forget, we move on Halloween of that year. I don't remember the year, but I thought, this will be great. We'll hand out candy. Nobody was doing Halloween that year. Nobody was doing it.
Trying to work in a law firm, trying to work any place and raise and rear children is difficult. There is a funny moment in your book, at least I thought it was funny. I know my sisters out there will understand. You talk about the special relationship that you had with your hair.
With my hair. Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah,
Well,
trying to figure it out.
trying to figure it out. And I saw this woman who had this kind of hair. So, it started actually the year that I was on the Supreme Court, clerking. Because prior to that, I had straight hair, and I would spend hours on the weekends, the washing and the rolling. You sit under the hair dryer, and I actually liked it. It was like my spa day. But when I got to the clerkship, there was no time for that. So I literally cut my hair off to like this during the clerkship. And then I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I saw this woman who moved back to D.C. who was walking through, who had what are called sister locks. This is the style that I now wear. And I basically chased her down and said, "What is that? Where did you get your hair done?" And she gave me the name of her stylist, and I've been with the same hairstylist for 16 years now.
At some point in time, part of your career took you to the Sentencing Commission. I have to talk about that.
Yes, of course.
I have to talk about the Sentencing Commission.
Of course.
You were on the staff there, and
Yes.
ultimately you were appointed a commissioner.
Yes.
How has that shaped how you do your job today, or did any jobs after that?
Well, it was certainly crucial for me, at least, with respect to my trial, being a trial judge. I mean, that the trial judges sentence defendants, and so to have an understanding of the guidelines and sentencing policy was enormously helpful. But I think it was just also really wonderful. I mean, the commission was a fantastic place. I had the wonderful fortune of going there as a staff member when my daughter was young, right after we moved back to D.C., and learning about the agency. It's an agency of the judicial branch. I knew I was interested in criminal justice. I was interested in criminal law when I was in law school. And so this obviously was connected to my core interests in the law. And learning about sentencing policy, what's so funny is it's almost like weird that I'm in my current job or that I became a judge, because ideally I would like to be the world's expert about the smallest little thing. Like, I'm the kind of person who wants to know everything in the world about a narrow set of issues. And so the Sentencing Commission was perfect. It was like not criminal law, it was sentencing, and I was like all in trying to figure it out. So I don't know how I ended up being the generalist that I am right now, but I loved my time on the commission and its influence on how I think about many issues, I think, is apparent. Yeah.
And you served as a commissioner. You were appointed by President Obama, I think.
I was.
And then you had to have a confirmation hearing or Senate hearing for that.
I did.
And then you were nominated to go to the district court.
Yes.
And I think your vote there was unanimous, I think.
I think so. Yeah, back in the day where they didn't really take a vote, they just did it by unanimous consent. Yeah.
And you've had 2 confirmations hearings since, because you were nominated by President Biden to be on the Court of Appeal.
Yes.
Tell us about that experience versus working on the D.C. circuit.
Yes.
Which is the ultimate circuit with respect to. That's my friend Ray Lohan.
The Second Circuit thinks otherwise.
All right. So tell me how you enjoyed that. I mean, because you didn't stay there long.
I was not there long. Again, so many forces beyond your control. You don't really know. I would say the hardest professional transition that I had was from the Sentencing Commission to being a trial judge, because I had been an appellate lawyer in practice, and appellate practice is very, very different than trial work and trial practice. And so becoming a trial judge was like very hard. Going from a trial judge to appellate judge for me was like coming home a little bit, because I, had done appellate clerkships, and I had worked as an appellate appellate lawyer, and so I really enjoyed my time in the D.C. Circuit. But you can't pick and choose.
Can't pick and choose
your shot when it comes to be elevated on.
And the angels came.
And the angels came.
And so your next stop was where you're sitting now.
Yes.
And you talked in the preface about how important that is to the ancestors and the children who see you today. You were just on the Virgin Islands a few weeks ago.
I was just last week in the Virgin Islands talking to high school students, talking to college students, really trying to encourage people. What I think the takeaway from my story is that anything is possible, and that if you believe in your ability to succeed and you put in the work. One of the things I said to the students is nothing worth having comes easy. And so you need to know that going in, and you need to ask yourself, as you try to figure out what you want to do in your life, you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to work for? Because that's the thing that will make you successful, to aim toward the thing that you're willing to put the effort into. And for me, it has always been the law, public speaking, having the opportunity to talk to all of you in sessions like this. And I'm hoping that I'm inspiring people, because if I can do it, really anyone can.
Well, President Biden nominated you to the Supreme Court, but I think President Obama got a letter from someone, one of these real angels in your life.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, back when I was on the district court, and I had been maybe 3 years in, having been appointed by President Obama, Justice Scalia dies. This is 2016, and my daughter, at that time, my youngest daughter, is in middle school, and she comes running in. This is maybe 3 or 4 days later, and she says, "Mom, did you hear that Justice Scalia died?" I said, "Yes, sweetie, I did hear." She says, "Well, my friends and I were talking, and we think that since you're a judge, you should apply for that position." And I said, "Sweetheart, being on the Supreme Court is not the kind of thing that you apply for. The president just knows about you. He just hears about you and, decides he wants to appoint you." And she said, "Well, if President Obama needs to hear about you, I'm going to write him a letter." And she did. She goes running off, and she comes back, and she has this beautiful handwritten letter where she is endorsing me. My mother is, a nice person. She'll never brag. And my husband took a picture of it, and then actually we got it to him. But, it was so incredible, because for many of you who have teenagers, you don't know that they even know what you're doing, not to mention that they would, propose something like this. And I thought, here I have a child who at times I felt like I have not been giving her sufficient attention. She is not afraid to speak her mind, even to the President of the United States. So I must be doing something right.
I guess you could I don't know if you call it a rough confirmation hearing. You had a long confirmation.
I had a long confirmation.
You had a long confirmation.
I did.
And the thing we're going to close out with is
Yes.
something during your hearing, Senator Cory Booker. You had been through all the grueling questions.
I had.
And you write about his turn to ask the question. And he put down his notes and really didn't ask a question. It's hard for me to look at you and not see my mom, he said. Not see my cousins. That's what he told me. This is what you're writing. I see my ancestors and yours, he continued, before pausing to remember a woman who had approached him on the street to express her overwhelming pride in and enthusiastic support for my nomination. Nobody's going to steal the joy of that woman in the street or the calls that I'm getting or the texts. Nobody's going to steal that joy, Senator Booker says. You have earned this spot, Ketanji. You are worthy, Ketanji Jackson. You are a great American. In that moment, a single tear of gratitude for the senator's kindness came down your cheek. And after that, Patrick and your daughter, you all went to a separate room. Your daughter says, Senator Booker will always have a place in my heart. Because in the middle of the storm, he stood up for my mom. We're going to stand up for you, baby. We're standing up for you. We're standing up for you.
Thank you very much. That was fun. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.